All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the WNY Reach, or the Weenie Reach, special podcast this afternoon. It's Friday, December 11th. We thought we'd throw something out at you that is a subject close to all of us, which is the law, how it applies in different circumstances, etc. And who better to talk about the law than three lawyers? We have two in studio and one by phone, and first we'll introduce our master of ceremonies here, the wonderful from the gates of hell, Pete Reese.
Hello out there, everyone. I'm here taking a bit of time off from serving my master Satan to talk to you this afternoon.
Oh, now that is too good. Now over here with his good friend Andrew Como, we've got Paul Fallon. Say good afternoon, Paul.
Good afternoon, Pete, and everyone out there. Thanks for having me.
Great, and we also have on the line Max Tresman. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Hey, so we're going to put up the scales of justice. Max, introduce yourself. Tell us where you practice, a little bit about yourself.
Well, for everyone listening, my name is Maximilian Tresman. I am a partner at Tresman & Tresman LLP in the city of Buffalo, where we practice primarily in the areas of elder and commercial litigation.
Excellent. How long have you been in practice?
I have been in for 4 years.
Wonderful. All right. So, Pete, you had some ideas here, and we've got Max and Paul in studio. My name is Peter Green with the WNY Reach, and I'm going to turn it over to you to start talking about the different subjects that you feel each of these gentlemen can best present and speak on.
All right, what we're going to do in summary today, I'm going to do a quick update on our last show Friday. We went a little too long, but we did about an hour and 20 minutes on the City of Buffalo speed cams. And I had my first hearing this week, and update us on that. We're then going to have Max give us a little bit of background on a group he works with who are responsible gun owners from Western New York, and some of their political plans perhaps. And we'll talk a little about election law. And the main part I want to get out of that is access to the ballot. And one of my favorite old-time talking points, which is, if I control who's on the ballot, what good is your vote? And it's my position that party bosses control the ballot, so party bosses control your vote. We're going to have Paul Bat clean up at that point to talk about a case that he's working on that may have reached very near to the end. He's been working on this for years. It's been written up in local media, and it really has to do with police violence / misconduct. So without further ado, we talked about the school speed cams. I had my first hearing on a speed cam this Wednesday. My client had 3 speeding tickets, and foolish person though I am, well, just to review this a little bit, the city of Buffalo has an invite from the state to conduct a demonstration project. They can implement a school zone speeding cam, automated speeding cam program whereby they can fine people for speeding in school zones. But the enabling law for this, for the demonstration project, has some pretty clear-cut mandates as to what the standards are that they've got to meet if they want to do this. It's been our position all along. There's some real question as to whether this is being implemented properly. So I went into this hearing, and there were really, my individual had 3 speeding tickets. We only had a hearing on 1, and I kind of decided I just wanted to do them one at a time. I explained to the hearing officer that things were changing. On Tuesday, the Common Council had a bit of a knockdown drag-out on this. They're not happy with the speeding cam program. A lot of people are not. But as the first phase, first step of the hearing, I said, Your Honor, there's been a lot of talk. The mayor has admitted that 20,000 of these citations went out, and people didn't have timely notice. You're supposed to get notified of the infraction within 14 business days of the time that you commit the purported offense. And no one saves an envelope. I mean, think about it for a second. I throw away 80% of my junk or my mail at home because it's junk mail, and the stuff I do keep, I don't save the envelopes. I'm buried in paper as it is. Nobody keeps the envelopes. How do you know when your citation was mailed? You look at the postmark. to review this again, the company that's running this program is out of Massachusetts, and somehow or other they're mailing this stuff from Oklahoma. It's taking 5, 6, 7 days to get the stuff up from Oklahoma. It's important that you have timely notice because you're getting a ticket for something, your car's getting a ticket for something that you're probably not going to remember a month later, so you have to have some kind of timely notice. I would be happier if it said 14 calendar days, but it says 14 business days. That can get weird because November had 2 holidays and Thanksgiving was 1 or 2 holidays, so, counting it. Anyhow, I start out the hearing, they say, Your Honor, we don't have our envelope. But the statute says that prima facie evidence of proper mailing, timely notice under the statute is either a manual or an electronic log that would be provided to you by the company that's running these. And I said, so, this was like October 12, so if you can show us from the log that you'll have there, maybe it was mailed on November 3rd or November 4th. Well, we can waive that. We'll accept that it was mailed timely. Hearing officer said, Mr. Reese, I don't have any log of anything. And, I read to the judge the statute, and it basically says the prima facie evidence of proper mailing and thus notice, is this log. So he said, well, I don't have that. And I said, well, we can't tell this notice was timely. I'm going to have to ask for a dismissal on that. And generally, you present your whole case. Well, the second point we had, which we talked about last week, these tickets are going out. You have to have a camera number on them. That's part of the statute. It says you got to have a camera number. The camera number on these was null. This is halfway important because when the machine starts up at the beginning of the day, it has to do a calibration test. And I expected to see the results of a calibration test there, that I could match up with a camera number to know that on the day this citation was issued, at least when it started up in the morning, this camera was operating properly. Well, we didn't have that either. Then my guy admitted he was driving the car. He admitted he was driving in front of Canisius. He was going north. And there's a beacon sign that should have been flashing the other side of West Ferry. He got 3 tickets, and the beacon was never flashing. 2 of the tickets, the 2 subsequent tickets, which I kind of snuck in as, part of the first hearing, the subsequent tickets were the same day, going in, within an hour of each other. The fellow took his wife to yoga and went back and picked her up. So, it's pretty clear he didn't know this was happening. He was a responsible individual. So pretty much at the end of the hearing officer dismissed the whole thing. I gave him my copy of the statute, with my annotations. But anyhow, I think I busted the whole system because let's talk about what would happen in a traffic court if we were trying a person for speeding. And I haven't done a speeding trial in this century, okay? It was probably in the 1990s I did one. Typical sort of thing is you got an independent judge, you got a town prosecutor, you got an arresting officer, you put them on a stand, and usually the town prosecutor is going to be doing this and saying, you were using an XYZ GB radar gun, and you calibrated it that morning, and it had been tested out in the lab 2 weeks earlier, and everything was running fine, and this is the time you got it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you'd have the cop there, you'd have the prosecuting attorney, and then as a defense attorney, I would be trying to attack the testimony of the arresting officer, the guy that ran the radar gun, and that's not easy, and that's why when you can, you go out of your way to make sure you get a plea. You get a non-moving violation and pay a parking fine. Pay $100, and it's a good deal. Better than 3 points. In this particular case, you got a defense attorney, you got a judge, you got the hearing officer, but the city's case is being made by a pile of paper. There's nobody there. There's no, city prosecutor who's presenting the case. And if it's not accurate and complete, if the hearing officer doesn't have everything in the stack of papers in front of him, and I guess the hearing officer pretty much said, what I have is what's on the citation. Well, it's flawed statutorily on 2. And they all got dismissed. Well, it seems to me if you ask for a hearing and you show up and say, I dispute that I got proper notice, the hearing officer can't know. And that ought to be an automatic dismissal. You know, it may be, it may not, but from point of view of fairness and procedural due process, the city hasn't made its case. And to me, that shut down the whole program. And if you look at the statute, it's a handbook on how you're supposed to prosecute these. I have no sympathy for the city or this company that's issuing these citations. Here's the law. This is what you're supposed to have available at trial. They didn't have it available at trial. Not my fault. I win. Goodbye. So that's the status of it. I don't think this system can work at all at this point. One more thing, Peter Green and I went out and did another flyby on this the Canisius cameras, just for the heck of it, to see if we could pick anything up. And one thing we learned from, and I guess it's really obvious, but it's not obvious until you know about it. At Canisius, the camera going north is right in front of Canisius High School, so I didn't have that defense. But if you're going south on Delaware in front of Canisius, you get ticketed like 2 blocks before Canisius in front of a bunch of law offices. And it doesn't make any sense. I mean, why would they give you a ticket in front of a law office rather than in front of the high school? When you start to look at available poles, it suddenly becomes really obvious. They are putting these cameras on poles that are already there, not where they need to be. And, you know, I'm sorry, that's a really sloppy job. And it's not my job to run the city or to help them prosecute these. And Peter and I had previously done some work with the Cannellation Center, which is next to St. Joe's on Main Street, and the camera there is giving you a ticket in front of an empty building, not in front of the school. As you're going into the city, you know, you've already gone by the school, and suddenly you get a ticket in front of an empty building. Makes no sense. Why? Because there's a pole there. That's why. Well, I'm sorry, that's crazy. Too bad, city. Start over. I mean, straighten this out and get it right. I'm going to be talking to more common council members about this. So that's pretty much the update on that. So I want to turn this over to Max with the Scales of Justice and have him talk about a group he's working with and some issues he's got about people wanting to have a choice in upcoming elections. Max, you're on.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. So, is Peter just?
Wait a
the
minute.
last name is.
Wait a minute. Let's get that right. It's Tresmond.
Oh, Tresmond.
Yeah, we want.
Yes.
We want. If we don't have Max's smiling face, we get at least spell his name right.
He doesn't want to be in Hades, does he?
I think it was John D. Rockefeller once said, "I don't care if you call me a son of a bitch, as long as you get my name right." So we can call Max any name we want now because we have his name right. Go to it, Max.
Okay, very good. So, 2021 is set up to be an exciting year in local elections, if for nothing else than for the fact that there's a new political party that's really coming out of the blue, coming out of nowhere. And it basically involves a group of local gun owners here in Erie County who are really dissatisfied with certain people in the local political climate. Those people shall remain nameless here. But they primarily hadn't been politically active for most of their lives. The average gun owner leans conservative, although there are many exceptions to that rule. They typically haven't voted in years past, and then they became politically engaged after the 2013 passage of the New York SAFE Act. That would be the AR-15 ban in New York State, which for other reasons never turned into a true ban because these guns are for sale, but they have to be cosmetically modified. But these people were very angry. They formed a political action committee, and they have a group. And that group has since risen to about 22,000 members in Erie County alone who regularly participate in this group's events. So you're looking at what is probably the largest single constituted committee or political organization in upstate New York. And if you break New York City down by the wards and districts, it's probably bigger than anything in New York City in terms of the sheer number of active people who are involved, who are on the mailing list. And they have notably been involved in several elections where the margin of victory for a particular candidate had been equivalent to the amount of people who were involved from that group in that campaign. So what you're going to see is this party coming together. They have been the first political organization to endorse John Garcia for sheriff. And they're going to be heavily involved in the sheriff's race and the New York State Supreme Court races next year. I think you're going to see a lot of people understandably feel threatened in the political scene that a group of people who were politically disengaged have decided to come together and form a party. And they're backed by attorneys, they're backed by experienced people who understand the election law, who have seen how new parties have failed in the past, what the pitfalls are, and understand the appellate division and the Court of Appeals decisions on these matters on getting on the ballot. And there's going to be a lot of disruption in terms of new people coming in next year, at least in Erie County. So that's pretty exciting.
All right, now, Max, just by way of point of reference, I'm a member, so is my wife, of the Erie County Democratic Committee. And, I mean, these aren't just all the registered Democrats, but there's only 1,600 people on the Erie County Democratic Committee. And you're talking about 22,000 people here. That's a sizable number of people. I assume and hope that they're registered voters. Now, are these responsible? They responsible gun owners, or they're wild cowboys that just go shoot them up?
They're responsible people. They take gun ownership seriously. They don't engage in dangerous behavior. The vast majority of them are regular shooters. Many of them are involved with clubs, so they understand the safe handling of firearms, the safe storage of firearms. They understand the laws associated with firearms, what you can do with a gun, what you can't do with a gun. And then the areas of what you can do with a gun, but what you shouldn't do is a matter of personal policy. There are certain places where you can carry a gun, certain laws that apply to handguns and guns that you simply wouldn't do because you wouldn't want to attract unwarranted attention from anybody or have to explain what you're doing. So these people are very cautious, but they care about their right. Their rights have been violated. There's no question about that. And they are serious about telling the Republican and other parties that you've taken our vote for granted for so many years. If you don't start producing for us instead of giving us lip service, we're going to see to it that you never win another election in this town again. And they can do it. 22,000 active people counts for a hell of a lot more than 22,000 votes in towns and legislative districts where the margins of victory are much smaller than that. So I can see a lot of pressure on certain major and minor political parties to change their attitude and be a little bit less arrogant in how they approach these issues.
Okay, just by way of curiosity here, Paul, are you a gun owner?
Yes, I am.
Okay, how about you, Peter Green?
I'm a Canadian. I came here with knowing that we have the right to bear arms here. I'm now a U.S. permanent resident. We have the right to bear arms. Up in Canada, we have the right to arm bears. So what I do is I'm going to get my concealed carry permit, and I believe in being a gun owner. I believe that I've watched kids who are 10 years and 12 years old learning about firearms, and they can strip them and clean them and handle them with wonderful respect. And that is way better than some kid, that happens up in Canada a lot, stumbles into mom's drawer and pulls out a pistol, or dad's drawer, pulls out a pistol and it misfires in the wrong way. So I'm a big supporter. I don't own one yet.
Okay, do you own a long gun or anything like that? Because you could own that legally, I believe. Correct?
Yeah, no, not yet. I have to. I hope to acquire one soon, and I do enjoy going out on shooting ranges. So
Want to borrow one?
yeah.
Paul, do you have a carry permit?
No. Like I said,
How about you, Max?
you can infer what you want to infer. I don't discuss any permits or licenses that I hold other than my
Un-
law
un-
license.
Understood. Just for the record, I have a carry permit. And obviously, I'm a responsible gun owner. Let's go a little bit further here and talk about the kinds of things you could do. If you want to influence how the Republican or the Democratic Party pick the candidate who's going to be on the ballot, remember, in the end, nothing matters but what you get to do on Election Day. Now, you could always run a write-in candidate, but the only person I can think of whoever won a write-in was Bill Rogowski, won a write-in candidate for like a village board seat in Sloan, before Max was born. Okay, I mean, it's just the last time somebody won a write-in, there was a star in the east and 3 wise men were coming. So you got to have your name on the ballot somehow. Now, how do you get your name on the ballot? There's only going to be 4 parties on the ballot this year, probably. It's going to be the good old Democrat, Republican, conservative, and working families parties. The other 4 parties didn't make it. There's still litigation active, but it's probably not going anywhere. So, you can always write in. Okay, you can always write in Max Tresman for Supreme Court judge if you want, but his chances of winning, in 8 counties of Western New York, quite frankly, are not going to be that good. However, if he wants to run, if you want to write him in, there's nothing wrong with that. So, you can play the game, or you can probably figure out how you're going to win. So you can try to influence how the Democrats or the Republicans are going to pick their candidates. But the way you're going to do that is probably by being a member of the Republican County Committee or the Democratic County Committee. And my guess is the leadership of both of those are not going to be too willing to listen to you. I'm not sure about the leadership of the Conservative or Working Families Party. That tends to be a little bit smaller, more controlled group. But there is one interesting avenue for getting on the ballot. You can do an independent ballot line. You could pass a nominating petition under the name of Responsible Citizens and put your candidate on that. And in Erie County, you only need 1,500 signatures of licensed or not registered voters. If you got 22,000 members, my guess is that those people, given households, should probably control about 44,000 registered voter signatures. And for the nominating line, they can be any party they want or no party at all. Okay, I mean, there's an awful lot of people who are not in any party, and there's going to be a lot more because the Independence Party is gone. And there were a ton of people who were in the Independence Party who thought they were independents, like a TS at the end. And they were always a pain in the neck because when you circulated a petition to them, first you had to explain to them they really weren't independents. They were in the Independence, NCE party, and therefore you wanted to sign a petition. The way you get on the ballot in the primary, in a party primary, is to circulate a petition amongst the voters registered in that party. Usually that's got to be circulated by people registered in the party. So if you want to get in a primary in the Conservative Party, you'd circulate a petition to conservative voters in Erie County, and you'd have usually registered conservatives and or notaries circulating those petitions. Commissioners of deeds out of the city of Buffalo are good too. And that would enable you to get in the primary. Now the numbers game here is a little weird. To get in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary, it's probably a little less, but to get in the Democratic primary for sheriff, Max Tresman wants to run for sheriff in the Democratic primary. I don't even know, Max, what party you're registered in. Let's say you're a Democrat. You want to run in a Democratic, you got to get 2,000 signatures of Democrats just to get in the Democratic Party primary. You're probably not going to win because the machine isn't going to support you and they're going to do what they can to defend their line. That's a whole other story. But if you win the Democratic primary somehow, then you're on the line as a Democratic candidate at the top of the ballot in the general election in November. But that's a real rough road to hoe. And yet it's relatively easy to get an independent party line. Can you win on an independent party line? I don't know, but it's a heck of a lot easier than trying to run a write-in. I got your name up there. I just color in the little bubble. I don't have to remember Maximilian Tresman, and spell it as Tresman or Mond, or get it, wrong because I do it in Arabic or whatever else. And by the way, I've had those on write-ins. So it's going to be interesting to see how you guys want to exercise that influence. I mean, do you want to run a conservative candidate? Do you want to run a working families candidate? Do you want to run a Democratic candidate?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see. There is no political party that's going to have ownership of the candidates whom we run. Obviously, I believe John Garcia is a registered Republican, although don't quote me on that. He's going to be on the ballot on the
I think he's a Republican, okay? And I have heard through the grapevine that they're favoring him as the candidate, but there are other candidates that Republicans are considering. I don't really know. The Democrats don't talk to me. I'm the very worst Democrat ever, according to my county chairman. So he doesn't call me up, and we don't hang out together. So I don't know. They ran Bernie Tolbert last time. I've heard rumors they're going to run Bernie Tolbert again. Maybe, maybe not.
Without mentioning names here, I can give the listeners some really interesting inside information on how this went down with the sheriff. The gun groups came out in support of the sheriff, or the sheriff candidate. And the first thing that happened was that somebody influential called them up and asked them to pull back their support and essentially double-cross the person that they had already committed themselves to supporting. And that did not go over well. That was back when it was just an organization. And it was at that point that they decided, we're not going to have some politico from Western New York tell us how we select our candidates or tell us what to do, especially when this person has done absolutely nothing to help us, and in many ways has used us for support and given nothing back in return. So, nothing back in return in terms of political support, not money or anything like that. So it's going to be interesting to see. The judicial races are going to be interesting because this group historically has no particular commitment to Democratic or Republican judicial nominees. That's going to be a wild card, and within the 8th Judicial District, anything can happen because the margins are that close.
Yeah, now that's a whole other game. If you're running Supreme Court, if you're running for a county court judge in Erie County, you can pass a designating petition within the party. You could also, do a responsible citizens nominating petition. But generally what happens for Supreme Court positions, there is a system known as judicial conventions that no one knows anything about. And basically the Republican and the Democratic parties and the other parties would put up a bunch of party hacks on the slate. They're almost never opposed, so no one ever sees them. They would go up on the ballot in the primary, but if there is nobody else opposing them, they're not on the ballot, so you don't even know who they are. Running opposition slates to judicial delegate slates in the Republican and the Democratic Party, extremely difficult. And you got to do it in 8 counties of Western New York, and there are delegates from each of the counties. That's a huge undertaking. So that's not going to be as easy as it seems. And quite frankly, that system is set up to hand Supreme Court justices an insane amount of power over judges. Now, this is a little weird because it sounds funny. The highest court system in the state of New York has 3 levels, but the lowest level of the highest court system is Supreme Court. Okay, and then you have the appellate division of the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. Those are the 3 levels of the state system. That people think when you go to the Supreme Court, you're talking about the guys in Washington, the 9 old men and women. But that's not what it is. It's the lowest level of the state judicial court system. You have city courts and county courts underneath that. Up until the time that you get into the state court system, it's possible for Joe Palooka, attorney, to pass a designating petition, and he or she is the best candidate the Republican Party or the Democratic Party has. If they got the votes, they win. The party bosses can't control it. Judicial conventions are handed out by the party bosses. And in fact, the Brennan Center beat this system with a lawsuit probably 15 years ago. And the U.S. Supreme Court overturned it, and I think it was under the concept of Bush v. Gore, which has been choking us to death ever since 2000 in the Supreme Court, which basically says the states can do whatever they want. The Brennan Center showed that judicial delegates were like the county chairman's secretary was a judicial delegate. Nobody knew who she was. She didn't run. And they would have the judicial delegate, or the judicial delegates would meet and have the convention, and they would be handed a list of people they were supposed to vote for. They had no idea who they were voting for or what they were doing. They went to a meeting, and they were told, yeah, here's 22 judges, they're up, and, oh, okay, I'm voting for them. The Brennan Center factually showed that the whole thing was a charade and it was a monster. I actually sent them some money that year because it was a good job. They beat the system. We were probably going to have to elect Supreme Court judges just the same way we elect county and city court judges in New York State. And the U.S. Supreme Court threw out that decision. I can look up the case and get you the case name. But the Supreme Court unreformed New York State after a lot of work being done by the Brennan Center, which is the NYU Law School, or it's based in the NYU Law School. They do a lot of good work. They're a good organization. They're worthy of most anyone's support. And it's really sad, but the plain truth of the matter is Supreme Court judge nominations on the Democratic, Republican, conservative, working families party lines get decided in smoke-filled rooms by party bosses. And that's well documented. If you want to change it, probably need a constitutional amendment or a revolution. And you're certainly not going to get that out of the current two dominant parties. In fact, after 2022 redistricting, the gerrymandering that's going to happen, the Democratic Party is going to be so dominant in New York State, it's all going to be the Democratic Party running everything in New York State, except in the hustings out. You know, if you live in Orleans County, somewhere in the town of Ridgeway, everybody you elect will be a Republican, but forget it from then on in. We're never going to see an appellate division or court of appeals judge again who's other than a Democrat. Certainly in my lifetime. I mean, I'm 76. It's not going to change. In the past, because the Senate was divided, the governor traditionally had to split up the nominations, so you'd get one Republican, one Democrat, one Republican, one Democrat. They're going to be all Democrats from now on.
Sorry to interrupt, Pete, but I put money on that. You know, you get a Republican judge. You know, these deals get made. That doesn't matter what the voters want or what any election.
What do you got to deal with if you're a Republican? I don't need you anymore.
Well, you know.
You know what? In fact, they created the 63rd Senate district. Okay, just to break the tie in the Senate, and they can change the number of districts. My guess is they're going to knock the number of districts down. And to give you an idea as to just how cynical this system really is, a few years back, a bunch of assemblymen ran for the city council in New York City. The reason they ran is because they could stay in New York and they didn't have to drive or take the train to Albany, and they made more money. Well, there were 10 assembly seats vacant out of New York City. Okay, the governor could have called a special election. It was Cuomo, and he didn't bother. And he was heard to remark about it, why do I need more mouths to feed? He already had enough votes to control the assembly. So basically he was saying that I got 10 excess Democratic assemblymen and I just don't care. We don't need them. So like those seats were vacant from I think June to January of the next year. We are going to have some pretty ugly boss-run Democratic Party politics in New York State. And like I'm not saying that the Republicans are saints or anything else. You know, here's the problem: when one group gets total power, they exercise total power, and nobody in power ever gives up power willingly.
Well, my point is that I think you saw it in play in the national election that the machine Democrats is who's in power in the whole country have a more distaste for leftist Democrats than they do for Republicans. So if you ever got an inroad for, say, a progressive Sanders type Democrat in one of these districts, likely the Democratic Party would rather see a Republican than a actual true progressive Democrat win. So
Yeah.
that's how they would get some leverage.
That would require a real coincidence. I think New York State is going to be so stacked after 2022. That's when we're going to redistrict based on the 2020 census. You know, and
Oh, wait a second. I want to jump in here.
go ahead.
You know, this is assuming that the Democrats retain the governor's seat, which is no guarantee depending on what happens next year. We're looking at quite possibly the worst bankruptcy crisis in history, and I'm including the 2009 uptick in bankruptcy filings after the Great Recession. You're going to see state and local budgets so hamstrung that there are going to be across the board tax hikes. You have people, primarily elderly people, who tend to be the most engaged voters. They're on a fixed income. They're the ones most likely to be paying their property taxes out of pocket. Even with star exemptions, they're high. And if they get a 10 to 20% tax increase on these tax reassessments, and they're not getting anything for their money, and they are stretched from one end to the other, you're going to see people start voting for Republicans because the Democratic Party isn't really doing anything to help the little guy anymore.
Well, you may be right, Max, and just to interject in this, every honest elected official will admit to you that the 2020 budgets that they passed in their county or their town or their city included a 20 to 30% deficit, and they passed it on the assumption that somehow or other the federal government would be Santa Claus and come in and bail them out. I don't think that's going to happen. And in order to make the budget balanced, in order to put it back into swing, you're going to have a combination of tax increases and service reductions. And it's going to be the worst of all possible pills. And that senior citizen who can't afford to pay anymore, they're going to have to pay more for less services. That's going to be very hard to sell. You know, we could get political revolution. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I don't think the Republicans have a magic cure for this either. I mean, they may tell you they do. But the long and the short of it is we're stuck, and we're not getting out of COVID till the end of 2021. I don't think.
The cure here is going to be bankruptcy, and that's the thing nobody wants to talk about, particularly with municipal bankruptcies. They are already hiring attorneys as outside counsel to municipalities in California to examine what their municipal bankruptcy obligations are. Now, that's no walk in the park. As soon as you implicate municipal bankruptcies, you've got pension fund issues, which is probably a lower risk in New York State because the pensions are funded. But you have independent contractors. You have the biggest employer in Western New York is a state agency or a state-related agency, a state-contracted agency. But I think that's coming, and I don't see how it can be avoided with the type of budgetary shortfalls we have and the state's refusal over the years to ever trim the fat to the political appointees who sit on these big authorities like the Water Authority or the Power Authority, with essentially do-nothing jobs that cost the taxpayer millions upon millions of dollars. And I don't think that anybody politically has the answer, or at least the answer that people want to hear. But that's not how voters react. Voters react by blaming whomever is in power and voting for whomever is out of power, on average. And that may be taken out against Andrew Cuomo. We had reports from leakers inside the state Senate that in the past month, Cuomo was trying his damnedest to get an appointment with the Biden administration. And when he was told that wasn't forthcoming, all of a sudden you saw a different attitude. He's back to being the angry, combative type of governor that he was before the COVID crisis hit.
I'm not surprised by that. I'll bet Andrew Cuomo would like to be the Attorney General appointee. You know, that'd be a great way for him to get out of New York State. And I'm absolutely in agreement with you. There's going to be a terrible problem here, but I don't care what party you're in. This is going to be a bitter pill one way or the other. I'm not sure we know which way this is going to go. And boy, your attitude that we're not going to let the party bosses tell us what to do. Yeah, you sure you grew up in Erie County? That doesn't sound like the Erie County I know. How about you, Paul?
Well, it sounds like the whole country that I know. I mean, counting on things getting really bad, I don't know. I don't see that as a great strategy. I mean, how bad do things have to get? I mean, they've been getting pretty bad for the last 20 years. I mean, all they could do was blame Trump for the problems that had existed for the 16 or so years before he became president. So, I just don't have a lot of faith in our democracy. I don't really think it exists anymore. So I'm not really a good person to ask.
That's a real downer for Friday afternoon. Could you say
I
something?
apologize.
Could you say something a little upbeat? And when we get done talking with Max, we're going to talk to you about a horrible situation that hasn't had a real nice outcome so far either. When people get done listening to this, I hope that they got a big jar of uppers somewhere that they can get to, or at least go out and have a beer. There's no easy solution to this. And do you see any politicians admitting this, or giving you the happy talk about it? Well, what municipality is making its budget numbers this year? I'd really like to know. I don't know.
I have people from both parties, who do consult with us, because one of the things that our firm does is offer consultation in bankruptcy matters to private individuals, companies, and public officials who ask for it. And they're all very worried about municipal bankruptcy. Take a look, and I can speak to this because I can tell you who isn't a client. Town of Hamburg, for example, is not a client, so I don't have any confidentiality on this issue. You have the McKinley Mall, which is going under. You, Paul, Peter here, everybody knows that malls are not a business model that's going to survive, especially this year with online shopping becoming so easy. Even if the pandemic hadn't hit, nobody wants to walk through a half mile of corridor to get to one item that may or may not be in stock when you can check online and order curbside pickup. So they're finished. And the McKinley Mall was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, taxpayers in the town of Hamburg. When the mall finally goes under, which there's no question that it will, Hamburg's going to get hit with a double whammy, because they're losing that revenue from the mall, and they are losing the revenue from the Hamburg Raceway Casino. What are the options at that point when, Hamburg's still a pretty big municipality anywhere in the state of New York except maybe the town of Hempstead? How are they going to come up with all this cash? They still have all these liabilities to pay. These bonds that they've issued over the years are going to become due, and they're going to be faced with no choice than to seek some type of bankruptcy protection. That's just my opinion, but I don't see a way out of it.
You may be right. And by the way, just so people understand this, full faith and credit municipal bonds, okay? Traditionally, they were incredibly secure, and they could get away with very low interest rates compared to what the market was. Because, in essence, if Hamburg declares bankruptcy and I get a full faith and credit bond out of the town of Hamburg, I own Town Hall. I mean, I can go set up my law office in Town Hall or play handball there. And, that's unthinkable, and that's why, it was unthinkable that municipalities could go bankrupt. Now we're seriously talking about it.
Didn't New York City go bankrupt
quite
a few years ago?
I want to tell you something. They put in a control board that wrote a whole bunch of paper, and I made a ton of money on that paper. For a while there, that was the Municipal Finance Corporation. That was Felix Rohatyn. We were getting 14% tax-free for a couple of years. Unfortunately, good things don't last. And now if you invest in municipal bonds, the rates are still low. You can get 3.5%. It's pretty good. Okay. I think I want to give Paul about 15 minutes on this. Max, why don't you kind of finish up? And Max, we want to thank Max because he is here on the line because he couldn't make it to the studio, and he's got another appointment that he's got to make. So Max, why don't you stay around, participate as long as you can, but give us a quick summary, and then I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me on as a guest today. It was a pleasure to be here. Again, the organization is the 1791 Society. If you have Facebook, they have a page on Facebook. You can check it out. Frank Panazik is the president of the organization. He's a retired Town of Hamburg police detective, and he's a hell of a nice guy. So check them out online. I look forward to seeing you guys in the future.
Right, thank you for coming. You're welcome anytime, and you're free to boogie out.
Thanks, Max.
All right. Nice to talk to you, Paul. Thanks, Peter. I'll see you guys later.
Bye-bye. Paul, tell us about what happened on the farm.
Oh, well, this happened quite a few years ago. I guess we just started on the broad point of view. A lot of people wonder why police rarely get convicted or held accountable for their acts of indiscretion in their
violence.
Actually, in violence. So, I had a case, and it's actually got to the point where our only option at this point is to file for a hearing with the Supreme Court.
And you mean the U.S.
The
Supreme
U.S. Supreme Court. Oh, but they. So my case was involved a family of 3 people. The Wiersbicks they live in Orchard Park and also have a farm in the town of Aurora. And a county sheriff, to try to make it short, a county sheriff had got let me back up. M&T Bank had a lawsuit against one of the parties, the father, Raymond Wiersbick. They wanted to serve on him a subpoena ducis tecum, which is just a request to get him to turn over his financial records. So often banks and lawyers will send their service. They want the piece of paper served on a person. They give it to the sheriffs. The sheriffs go out there and they hand it over. That is one of the ways that the sheriff's department makes money. It's been making money ever since in this kind of way since the sheriff of Nottingham. It's an ancient tradition.
And that's civil division. By the way,
Right.
That's the reason why, since the sheriff of Nottingham, we have a sheriff. It's the number one. They weren't founded to do road patrols or run jails.
Right. They're there to make money, So anyhow, this sheriff, he came out to their place where they were working at their farm, where they were actually in the process of planting some tomatoes, I believe. And he had this piece of paper that he wanted to serve on Raymond. He was in his car, it was all in his uniform and everything. He came to the property, and he was met there by Raymond's son, Brian. Brian told him, Raymond's not available. I can take the paper. That's all you got to do.
That would have been good service.
That would have
right?
been valid. It's completely valid. And the sheriff's manual completely says that's all it takes.
His job is done. He can go home.
His job is done. But he saw a older man, not far away, and says, "Well, who's he? I want to know who he is." And Brian told him, "Look, just give me the piece of paper. You're on our property. Please leave." And he refused to leave. I'm not leaving until I know who this guy is. And he said, "Look, you're trespassing. Get off of our property." The sheriff wouldn't take no for an answer. He directly asked Raymond, "Who are you?" And Raymond said, "Unless you got a search warrant or a warrant for my arrest, get the F off my property." Immediately he was told he was under arrest. Later, he wasn't told what he was under arrest at that time. We later came to find that he was charged with menacing, meaning the sheriff thought he was in danger of being attacked. His rationale for this was Raymond was working on a tractor and had a pair of pliers in his hands, and he was 10 yards away. Wasn't even close to him. So, long story short, they come in. Raymond basically said, "You're out of your mind. You can't arrest me for telling you to get off my property. This is my property. You're trespassing," which is also, by the way, is the law in the state of New York, is if a trespasser refuses to leave your property, you're allowed to force him off your property by any means short of deadly violence. So he was in every right to tell this guy to get off his property now, but instead the sheriff refused to leave, called in his reinforcements. They beat the crap out of him, beat up his son, arrested his wife also who was there. And eventually they were exonerated after having to go to, we had a trial in the town, convicted. We appealed to the county court, which is where you go from the town court, and they were exonerated. Basically the judge said, you should have just gave the piece of paper to the son and been done with it. So we filed up with a federal lawsuit, which we lost, unfortunately, because I guess the thing that is at the heart of these types of lawsuits to try to make somebody responsibility for the damage that they do is a thing called qualified immunity. And police have what's called qualified immunity, meaning you can't sue them unless I have a quote from a case that says it very plainly. It's the quote. It's an old case from 2011, but put simply, qualified immunity protects all but the plainly incompetent or those who knowingly violate the law. So in order for you to be held responsible, you have to be so incompetent or know that you're violating the law to be held responsible. Otherwise, all they do is say, oh, I thought I was within my rights. He had I was nervous that he had pliers and I wanted to put handcuffs on him, so I couldn't put handcuffs on him when he's got pliers, so I had to go knock him around a little bit before I could arrest him. It just lets the law enforcement people off the hook way too often, too easily, and it needs to be reformed. That's about the size of it.
Right now, this was written up in one of the local independent papers. Which one was that?
It was Art Voice a number of years ago.
Okay, I think that's online still. So how do you spell Wiersbick?
Wierzbic.
Okay, so I think if you got on the Art Voice website and put in and search Wiersbick, you'd find a story. It was quite detailed. It's actually pretty amazing. And just to get a little further in this civil process serving, I mean, anybody who's over 18 can serve process in New York State, and it's not a big deal. And just because a guy in uniform with a badge and a gun and a cop car is the guy that served it, this is not any reason to say, hey, I'm here, enforcing the law. I mean, there was no crime being committed. There was nothing going on. This cop was afraid. Now, what I think you'll see if you follow these cases, cops are afraid of the silliest thing ever. It's just, it's mind-boggling what cops can be afraid of, because they obviously know and are trained that if they say they were afraid. This wasn't a cop, but I remember the most craziest one I've ever heard of. Animal control officer a number of years ago in the city of Lackawanna got off. He shot a mother cat and 4 kittens with a .22 in the basement of an occupied building, which is nuts in and of itself, by the way. He's lucky he didn't kill himself. You don't discharge firearms in the basement of the building. Killed 5 cats because he was afraid. He was afraid of a mother cat and 5 kittens. He was prosecuted for this and got off, I assume, based on the doctrine of qualified immunity.
Well, probably, and that's exactly the case. I mean, unfortunately, we haven't been able to reform the way the police handle a lot of these types of situations, and they all know what. This guy probably didn't even know what to charge my client with until after the fact. He probably talked to his boss. He said, it was more like this guy disrespected me and I wanted to kick his ass. So just like, this sicko with the cats was probably like, I don't like cats, and I killed him. And then afterwards they think, oh, wait a sec. I could have been afraid, or I could have been
I must have been
intimidated
afraid.
Or whatever. They know what buttons to push. I mean, that's what needs to be reformed. I mean, a lot of people like to talk about this defund the police thing. I mean, it doesn't have any kind of real connection to it what is actually happening. And what needs to happen is that the people that are acting as police officers need to be specialized in doing what they do best, which is actually going after real criminals, not out there intimidating civilians and not caring whether or not they abuse their badge.
Now, something I see all the time, Paul, maybe you could respond to this. People say, well, why didn't he just do what the policeman told him, the son and the father and whatever? And I see all the time, some black guy gets shot in the back running away, and the excuse for that is, why didn't they just do what they're told?
I guess because some people believe that they have rights that have been established over the 250 years of our country, that just because somebody has a police a uniform on doesn't mean that they can push them around.
Well,
and some people don't like to get pushed around by cops. I understand that. I mean, you have to stand up for yourself sometime. And if you have the right to say, look, I don't have to talk to you, you know, it's what good is it? What good is the Constitution if you know, we had the guy earlier, Trezman was talking about, Second Amendment rights. Well, what good is it if you don't try to stand up for it?
Doesn't it say somewhere in the Constitution? Because I hear this all the time. Doesn't it say somewhere in the Constitution that black people and other disfavored minorities at the moment just have to do what the police say? Isn't that somewhere in there?
It's
because the way people act and the way people talk and they post on social media, I'm certain that that's there. And I post sarcastically from time. If we could just, repeal that part of the Constitution that says that. It said that in the Constitution in Nazi Germany. We don't have to do what the police tell us to do. And we don't have to respect the police either. I love to respect the police when they're acting properly. They're good people when they're, I love it when they do their job right. I like a lot of cops. Trust me.
Well, that kind of it comes to the real crux of the issue is because a lot of times, especially in the minority communities and so forth, they have had enough connection with the police to know that they're not going to be treated fairly. They know that their rights are going to be violated. So sometimes they say, I'm not going to let this happen because I've dealt with it before. In the civil rights area in the law, one of the things we always look at is we get clients that can be the ardent people that say, well, why don't you just obey the cops? They're there to do what you want. But then if their kid gets pulled over and the cop abuses the kid, not necessarily physically violent, but takes away their rights, makes up some story, you turn them into a Constitution-hugging ACLU supporter that instant, because they now realize that they have absolutely no right that they can exercise in the face of the overwhelming authority of the police. And they get, especially communities that get beat on by this kind of stuff all the time, get fed up with it, and they get fed up with it fast, and that's why they don't obey.
Can I give the cops the finger?
You can, but you'll get your ass kicked half the time.
You probably don't advise it, do you, as an attorney? But you know what? There was a case recently in Pittsburgh. This guy gave a cop a finger, and he didn't know he was giving a cop a finger, quite frankly. Somebody was next to him yelling at him, tooting his horn. He wasn't looking because he was looking at somebody to his right. He turns around, it's a cop. They arrested him. That cost the city of Pittsburgh, I think, $75,000 to get out of that.
Yeah, that's been the law for a long time.
If people think we're living in Nazi Germany, quite frankly, and we have to obey the Gestapo police, that really frightens me. I mean, shouldn't the schools teach this in somewhere in high school civics or something?
Yeah, well, they probably should. My friend Dare Irwin was a lawyer that helped me with this case. He calls it the Holy Trinity. So when you get confronted by a cop who's doesn't like what you're doing, and you believe you're perfectly within your rights, maybe giving him the finger, which is completely within your rights, he'll still charge you with disorderly conduct, which we call as disrespect of cops. So you're like, he's going to say, oh, you're creating a problem here in society because you're not respecting me appropriately, and then you say, wait, I can do that. the First Amendment gives me the right to like say whatever I want to you as long as I'm not threatening you or whatever. But then he's arrest you, and you go, no, you can't arrest me for that. That's crazy. False arrest. That you're charged with it, and then you're also charged with obstruction of government administration. You're not letting me arrest you, so you're committing another crime. So it's 3 crimes. Disorderly conduct starts it, resisting arrest, and then obstruction of justice. The Holy Trinity gets put on you right away, and those are 3 misdemeanors. Well, disorderly conduct's not a misdemeanor; it's a violation. But the other 2 are misdemeanors, which could each put you in jail for a year.
Yeah, and it could be, I could be gone for, till COVID's over. Now, when I give you the finger, Peter, Paul, and the Holy Trinity here, are you frightened by this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's really going to, no, I think it's more, it draws anger.
If that frightens you, okay, I think you should get a job as a manager at a bowling alley rather than being a cop. And you know what? I am not out of sympathy with the cops. I think you should treat them with respect. I think they should earn that respect. But guess what? They get compensated pretty well. Typical cop makes $90,000 to $100,000 a year. They have great benefits. They get 20-year and out pension plans. And under the current law, by the way, there are some laws on a federal level that might limit this qualified immunity. It's hard to say what's going to pass and whatever, but at least there's some talk about it now. So, we probably talk further about this because I think we want to cut this off at this point. But so, okay, sports fans out there in social media world, here's some stuff for you to think about. You can do your homework, post your questions. We'll try to get back to you on it as well as we can. But no, I think we're all in agreement. It doesn't say in the Constitution that you have to do what the policeman says. Okay, and it just we don't live in Nazi Germany yet. I think we beat them the last war.
Well, I don't know.
I'll beat us then.
Yeah.
How are we going to wrap up this fun? I'm from here. I got to get back to work for the devil. And Paul, you got anything to say before we leave for the weekend?
Well, I don't want anybody to obey the. I shouldn't say that. I just. You should know what your rights are. That's one of the things people don't know what their rights are, and at least try to abide by the law. But then, when the law tries to take your rights away from you, stand up for yourself. Well, that's all you can do.
But by the same token, Paul, I don't want anybody to get killed because they're saying you can't make me do that. Oh yeah, bam.
Well, it's,
and quite frankly, if you're black in the city of Buffalo, we got cops who are just dying to get a shot at you. And we know who they are. Their names have been published. They've cost the city of Buffalo millions of dollars already, and they're still on the police force.
So let's quit saying defund the police and let's say reform the police. And
Stop police violence.
Stop
Okay?
police violence.
I got an idea. How about let me just fly this out. Here's an idea. How about if we have a moratorium in Western New York on police violence? Then next month, okay, till the middle of January, how about if the police don't beat anybody up and don't shoot anybody? Because if we did that, we'd be like Great Britain. Okay? Let's be like Great Britain and Western New York, and maybe we'll go 8 counties for the next month. Let's see if that can work. How about I'll start the clock now?
Okay. You got to report back when the clock gets. You probably already got violated by now. It's been like 30 seconds, but who knows?
So what does a snowball's chance have in hell?
Right.
We want to know. But the way the horns are sitting on your head, Pete.
There's my leader.
Oh, hear me, Prince of Darkness. Well, speaking of that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, Paul, for coming in, Max for
Thanks
calling
for
in, and Pete, as always, being our ringleader. We'll be back from time to time with different opportunities to talk about the law and have it answered by attorneys who are living it every day. So we thank you so much for tuning in from Yowawa Media and the Western New York Reach. We'll see you next Friday.